Welcome to our Global Accessibility Awareness Day talk featuring Oxana Loseva from Vanguard. And just some housekeeping first. Our webinar logistics are that you're muted by default. So we just ask that you stay muted unless called upon, just so that we're not hearing any background noise. And then you're welcome to use the chat for general discussion, comments, and questions. And please post any questions that you have during Oksana's talk, because we will have time at the end where Oksana will be able to answer some of those questions. Zoom has a closed caption feature if you need it. Let us know if you have any questions about that. And this event will be recorded and it will be shared to our YouTube channel. So make sure to like and subscribe that. So PhillyCHI, we are an interdisciplinary group. Whoops, hold on. I am on a single screen tonight. PhillyCHI is an interdisciplinary group committed to advancing UX, also known as computer-human interaction, hence the CHI, as a professional discipline and strengthening the Philadelphia UX community through regular educational programming and networking opportunities. We dedicate our work to a culture of knowledge sharing and community building. PhillyCHI implicitly supports a safe and positive environment for professionals to gather, converse, and explore interests in UX design. If you witness unacceptable behavior tonight, please notify a board member. And I will introduce our board members right now. So hi, I'm Kieran. I am the board chair of PhillyCHI this year. And tonight we will not be joined by V or Casey, but they're amazing. And I will pass it on to Epiphany if you just want to introduce yourself quickly.
Hi, I'm Epiphany. I'm a UX researcher with a background in architecture. I'm also the secretary of PhillyCHI.
Go for it, Laura.
Hey, I'm Laura. I'm a UX designer. I have a background in nonprofit fundraising, and I am the treasurer of PhillyCHI.
Hi, I'm Ellery. I am the community coordinator. I'm a UX designer as well. And before that, I worked in operations. And I'm very excited for tonight's talk.
Awesome. Thank you all. So tonight's schedule. So we did the breakout rooms and networking. Thank you all for participating in that. So now we're in the announcements and job time portion. And then at 7-ish, Oksana will start her talk. And then directly after, we'll do a short Q&A session based on the questions that you asked during the talk. And then we will announce our raffle and everyone can close out and enjoy their night. So, and with that, I will have Epiphany announce our raffle prize tonight.
So 3 people will be randomly selected. You don't need a ticket or anything. Just by being here, you're entered. Tonight, we're giving away this awesome book from Rosenfeld Publisher. It's called A Web for Everyone, Designing Accessible User Experiences. It's by Sarah Horton and Whitney Quisenberry. And basically, we're going to be emailing out a digital copy of that. So stay to the end of the call because we'd love for 3 people to get this amazing book about accessibility.
Awesome. Thanks, Epiphany. And now, Ellery, take it away.
So at all of our events, we have job time, which is a time for those who are hiring to share jobs that they have open. So we are focusing on Philly area jobs. So I would like to invite anyone on the call who is hiring for Philly-based role to unmute yourself and give a brief description of your job and what else you think people need to know about it. And also, or instead, please go ahead and enter those details on our job time spreadsheet, which I just put in the chat. This will only be shared during the call, so we won't be sharing it afterwards. So if anybody would like to share about a job they're hiring for, please feel free. All right. If you have one and you'd like to enter it at any point, just go ahead and enter it into that spreadsheet. So the networking sheet and the job sheet are on the same sheet. They're different tabs. Last time we had a issue where like there were too many people entering on the sheet at the same time. So some people were having problems entering. So if that happens again tonight, just wait a little bit. And when people are done on the networking sheet, you should be able to enter. So I just shared those again, and I'll share those links throughout the call and definitely at the end as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ellery. And Laura, would you like to shout out our sponsors?
Yeah, so just want to thank our 2023 annual sponsors, Think Company, Vanguard, Judge Group, Citizens Bank, Penn AI Tech, and Rosenfeld. And if your company would like to sponsor PhillyCHI, or if you have a free space we could use for events or just know of a free space, definitely let us know. We are always looking for sponsors and event spaces.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Laura. I also, one more quick thing, I wanted to shout out Ally Philadelphia. I actually don't know if they call themselves Ally PHL. I don't know the exact terminology, but this is an accessibility meetup group in Philadelphia that was really active before the pandemic. And I know that like during COVID, they kind of just stopped doing events for a while, but I was talking with Alex, who is a frequent PhillyCHI attendee and who also co-runs this meetup. And he said that they just had their first event in a few years as part of Philly Tech Week, and they're excited to have more events soon. They don't currently have their website live, but he did want me to share this Gmail address in case people wanted to reach out and learn more about that. But we'll definitely be sharing once they have more events coming up. We'll definitely be sharing that out. But just wanted to make sure to shout out that group and show that there's more accessibility discussion happening in the city. So. And without further ado, I will introduce Oxana Loseva. And Oxana is a senior UX researcher at Vanguard, focusing some of her efforts at work on accessibility and inclusion. She has built a panel of individuals with disabilities and conducts regular research with them. She has a background in service design and design research and mixes these methods in her work. In her spare time, Oxana takes her dog Pepper hiking around the Philadelphia area and goes on trips to discover local coffee shops. I loved that detail. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I will let Oxana take it away.
Thank you, Karen. All right, let me share my screen now and we'll get it going. Let's see. All right, so hi everybody, my name is Oxana Loseva. I'm a white female with brown hair and glasses, and I'm very excited today to talk about some of my work in accessibility. So I'm a researcher with Vanguard. I've been with Vanguard for going on 5 years now, and I split my time between accessibility and mobile space. So part of my role is to generate knowledge on how people with disabilities invest and manage money. And I conduct regular research with them, as was mentioned in my bio. I built a panel for myself, which is something I've been wanting to do in all of my roles as a researcher prior to Vanguard, but was never able to do that. So once I joined Vanguard, I was able to get boots on the ground and build the panel from the ground up. So I'll be sharing some of those efforts with you today. And we'll talk about why inclusion is important. I'll share my experience with working with a contractor with Down syndrome who assessed our content at Vanguard. And I'll talk about how I worked with her and some of the research methods that I've used with her, considering that she has Down syndrome, and methods that were the most successful. I'll talk about how I built an external panel of participants with disabilities, and also how I've generated an internal panel of over 1,000 Vanguard clients who either have a disability or care for somebody with a disability. And then I'll wrap it up with what we're learning, and I'll share with you some of the studies that we've done with these wonderful folks. It's truly a privilege to work with them. So it's my pleasure to introduce this work. So thank you so much for being here on Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So a little bit of an introduction. 1 in 4 US adults, that's 61 million Americans, have a disability. And a little unknown statistic is that they have over 490 billion with a B dollars in annual disposable income that we don't always tap into as designers and researchers. We don't design with their needs in mind, but they do have the disposable income. It's there, and we could be tapping into it and bringing in more revenue. But as a wonderful ethnographer who's blind, whom I've interviewed, she said a very compelling quote to me. She said, "You know what, Oxana? As a society, we don't think of people with disabilities as having money or managing their own money." And I thought, wow, that's a profound thing to say. So I decided to run a little experiment. I ran this a couple of years ago. I don't know if things have changed, but I would assume that they haven't. But I have an Adobe Stock account. So I went on there and I said, okay, I'll type person managing finances. And as you can see, I got a plethora of results. There were people working together in an office setting, people sitting at home managing their finances on their laptops, icons, illustrations, couples, retirees, all kinds of things. And when I said those words to you, person managing finances, everybody had an image come up that was probably similar to what we're seeing on the screen. It's a relatable image that we see. I said, okay, let me refine the search. Person with disabilities managing finances. And what do you know? Only 2 results came up, none of them showing an image of a person. So let me ask you this. What did you think about when I said person with disabilities managing finances? You probably thought about various things. You might have imagined somebody who's blind going to the bank or an ATM to withdraw money, somebody with Down syndrome depositing their check to their checking account, maybe somebody who's deaf or hard of hearing interacting with their advisor on a chat platform, or anything like that. Maybe it was somebody who was able-bodied, but with aging lost their sight or hearing, and now is managing their retirement and needs to have access to their money. But none of these scenarios were shown in the images that we have access to as designers in stock accounts, right? So that quote really rings true. We don't think of people as managing their own money with disabilities, and or having money or managing their own money. We don't have that plethora of images or illustrations. It's just not there. We're not there yet. We don't have that knowledge. So how can we foster inclusion for people with disabilities? Well, why is it important to be included? So I like to think about accessibility as what it is to client experience, as CX is what to UX is. So client experience, CX, is a holistic overview of how a person interacts with a service digitally, through the phone, through the brick and mortar store. UX is the digital interaction of it, right? It's the self-service through the screen, on your phone, on your desktop, on your tablet. So inclusion is a holistic overview of how somebody with a disability interacts with services. So all of the channels that they touch upon, and then accessibility is different channel interactions. So ADA compliance, physical accessibility of spaces, ramps, chairs, hearing aids, tactile things on ATMs, and braille readers on elevator doors and numbers. So how somebody interacts with different channels. And we know that people with disabilities are less likely to have a bank account, a credit card, credit score, or anything financial, because a lot of the times their family member will take on the responsibility of taking care of finances. So people with disabilities are often excluded from a financial service, and we did not design with their needs in mind. And it's unfortunately a vicious circle. So a lot of the times people with disabilities are excluded from our decision-making process. We don't design with their needs in mind. They can't access the service on their own, open their own bank account. They need to have assistance. Able-bodied person comes in, gives them assistance. Ultimately takes over the primary decision maker role in finances, and then keeps tabs on what is going on with the bank account, making sure that there's no fraudulent activity, things like that. And the person with a disability just logs in every now and then, or just swipes their card to use when they go out to eat with their friends or something like that. So yes, we don't design with their needs in mind. So as a researcher in my years of Vanguard, I've sat on the meetings where people would say, how would somebody who's retired use our service, or somebody who is up and coming in their wealth and young demographic would use this app, and what are their needs? But it's so rare for me to sit in a meeting and somebody say, how would somebody who's deaf interact with our chat experience? Do we think about those things? Have we thought about that? What about the language on our site? Is it ableist? Are we perpetuating ableist language, or are we welcoming to people with disabilities? You know, these questions, they have all come up, and I will talk about them later in this presentation, but it's very rare that these opportunities come up. And that's just because the system, the way it's been designed, it's not designed with the needs of people with disabilities in mind. But it's very important to include people with disabilities, because when we include people with disabilities and people with disability needs, everybody benefits, right? Voiceover, voice commands, we all use them, we've used those things, but they all started out as assistive technology. So, you know, iPhone has come out with new updates where you can point your camera to a door and it will tell you whether it's a push or pull. And I could see how it would be valuable information to have for an able-bodied person who has things in their hands or something, or just wants to know, like, is it a push or pull door? But it's an accessibility feature for somebody who's blind to know how to enter the building. So as researchers, there's just a lot that we don't know about how people with disabilities manage their money. And that is just simply true. There's not a lot of research done out there, and there's lots of reasons for it. So researching with people with disabilities, that's researching with a sensitive population. So there's a lot of red tape to go through and the ethics behind it. So it's just not something that's done. Sensitive populations are traditionally very difficult to do research with, so we don't have a lot of knowledge about them. So there's just like a process of acquiring the knowledge of people and the pool of participants. So it's just not something that's commonly done. So Vanguard and its accessibility and inclusion investment. So over the last 2 years, Vanguard has invested heavily in accessibility and inclusion within CXD, which is Client Digital Experience, which is a division that I work in. Now, we have an Office of Accessibility that oversees all of Vanguard, and they make sure that everything is compliant. And then what I do with my panel of people, I come in and say, okay, we're compliant, but is it usable? Is it a delightful experience? So I continue on to that research. We've also hired a contractor with Down syndrome who assessed our digital experiences. So when I started my panel of people with disabilities, I realized that people with Down syndrome have an enormous superpower of testing content, and they can tell whether or not it's compelling language, whether or not it's empathetic language, whether or not it's in plain talk. Is it understandable by everybody, or is it, really difficult to understand? Is it financial mumbo jumbo, basically? So we've hired a contractor to help us alleviate some of those pain points. We've invested in third-party recruiting and now have an external panel of 60 individuals with people with various disabilities that I do research with. And then we have an internal panel of over 1,000 Vanguard clients who identify as having a disability or being a caretaker of somebody with a disability. So a little about Vanguard as an organization before I move on. So we have 4 major parts to our organization. There's participant investors, which is your 401k provider. So somebody who has a 401k through their employer and is a client of Vanguard that way. There's an institutional investor, that's B2B, that's advisors from other institutions that use our products. There's international investors, and then there's retail investors. That's your brokerage account, IRA, trust, different things like that. So I work in the retail space. So my work touches on the individual investor, a person who comes to Vanguard, wants to open up a brokerage account, a joint brokerage account, an IRA, a 529, things like that. So that's the focus of my work. And that was the focus of my work with people with disabilities as well. So let me tell you a little about hiring a contractor with Down syndrome. So we hired Sandra. It's not her actual name. I'm using a pseudonym to protect her identity. And, when I first started working with people with disabilities, as I mentioned, I realized that people with Down syndrome had a huge potential of uncovering pain points in our content. And as a researcher, what I hear a lot is people say, you know what, Vanguard is very, you have to know about investing. It's very complicated language. You need to know what you're doing before you get in there. And then you'll understand what you're supposed to be doing. So with the panel, they were doing research about once every 3 months. And anything more than that, they were compensated for their work. So anything more than that would be considered income, taxable income. So I couldn't do more work with them, but we had a lot of content to test. So I created a job for a person with Down syndrome to be hired as a contractor on a part-time basis to assess our experiences. So Sandra did a wonderful job with us. And some of the things that she's uncovered is that she had trouble with acronyms like ETFs, IRA, RSS, RMDs, which is understandable. I mean, I didn't know what those things stood for before I started at Vanguard. So she had trouble understanding terms like employer plan, redemption fees, contingent, hypothetical income, Quicken. And just think to yourself, do you know what hypothetical income means? Probably not. So she really uncovered things that should have been in layman's terms that, you know, we want to communicate to our audience, but you really need to have a financial background to understand what those things mean. So she also plans to save money for retirement. So she wants to retire comfortably. She works right now. So her parents are retiring. So she's thinking about how she's going to retire when she stops working. So she's saving money towards, she has goals that she's saving towards, just like anybody else. She has a job and she has financial goals and she has a savings account and she's working towards those goals. And she wasn't able to open up an account for herself. She needed assistance. She wasn't able to open up a brokerage account in her own name. So somebody that was able-bodied would have needed to be with her to do that. So one caveat to this research is that our contractor represents only one user with Down syndrome. So Down syndrome happens on the spectrum, and Sandra was what we would say high functioning, right? So she's fairly independent. She still lives at home, but she has a job. She goes to work. She has a bank account. She is able to put in money into her bank account. But some people with Down syndrome are not as independent. Sandra also went to college at Westchester University. They did a pilot program for people with Down syndrome. So she graduated from that. So she has different skills that a lot of people with Down syndrome don't have. So she represents a specific type of person with Down syndrome. And another thing to consider is that Sandra had a high social desirability factor. So that means that she really wanted to please me when I was doing research with her. So she wanted to make sure that she's doing a good job, which is understandable, but we had to overcome that. So I had to come up with creative ways to make mistakes, basically, because I was looking for places where she would get tripped up. And in her mind, if she didn't understand a term, it was like, oh no, I'm doing something wrong, right? And she would get flustered, which is understandable. So she had a social desirability. And she wants to become an accessibility contractor. So she was often speaking from a perspective of people with various disabilities, but she wasn't able to connect with me and say, hey, you know what, people with Down syndrome would really have a difficult time understanding this, and that. So she wasn't able to articulate her own lived experience, but she was able to say from a perspective of people with other disabilities. So research methods that I've used with Sandra. So co-generative interview. This was during our first 2 months. I would essentially have her read a piece of content, and then I would interview her and probe deeper into what she's read, did it make sense, what things jumped out at her, what was the most compelling part of the thing that she's just read, how would you explain it to your friends and family? Now, when with this method, I was able to get a lot of understanding of the content and how difficult it was for her to process. But I was trying to see how well did she understand the material, right? So like I really wanted to go deeper into it. So I then did follow-up quizzes for 2 months where she would read the material and then I would write up, fill in the blanks, multiple choice, no quizzes at the end about the material to see her understanding of the material. So, still questions like, how did this make you feel? And can you fill in the blank? And would you like to work with an advisor? You've just read about working with an advisor. Is that something that's appealing to you? What does all digital advice mean to you? Things like that. So that generated a lot of success. But I also realized that it was putting a lot of pressure on Sandra because she was feeling like, oh, it's a quiz. I need to get an A on the quiz. It's going to be graded. And I was trying to really weed out where would she make a mistake to see what pain points she's facing. So I was like, okay, we're going to eliminate the quizzes. It's creating too much pressure. I want her to feel comfortable and safe and valued and appreciated in the working environment. So we did a follow-up written paper instead in the last month. So we read blogs that were thought-provoking on war in Ukraine and how it's affecting the markets, climate change and how that's affecting the markets, things like that. And I would ask her to write a couple of paragraphs about what she just read and what she thought about it and what stood out to her about it. And I specifically asked her to write it in her own words. And with this one, she wrote a very well articulated paper on working for Vanguard and what she enjoyed about working with Vanguard, and the importance of hiring people with disabilities. So she was writing about her experience as a contractor for Vanguard versus the material that she's just read. So the impact for her was on working for Vanguard, and I feel valued and appreciated, and you want to know my opinion. So she would answer those written up papers with that way. So the most effective method that I found working with people with Down syndrome is a code-generative interview. And I've done a lot of work with people with Down syndrome. It's a population that I've had the privilege of working with closely. And this rings true to me as a researcher with different methods that I've tried. I've also tried different color coding things that have worked well in the past. So using color in my research with people with Down syndrome, and in this case for content, a code-generative interview was the most successful because I was able to probe deeper, and I was there sitting there with her. So with quizzes, I would send her the quiz, she would do it, send it back to me. But with the code-generative interview, we were face-to-face, and I was able to dig deeper into what she was saying, what she understood, and I was able to really identify pain points and probe deeper to really feel out what she understood about the material. So how did I build an external panel of participants with disabilities? Well, it started as a thought that I had in my previous role before I worked at Vanguard. And I thought, I worked in retail, and I thought, well, how do people with disabilities shop? And, inclusion in shopping and fashion and things like that. So I thought, why don't we test it with people with disabilities? So when I came to Vanguard, I still had that idea of, well, how do we test with people with disabilities? So I realized that there's not a lot of research on how people with disabilities manage money. So, and I knew that we had an accessibility department, but we weren't following up with the compliance. But we had a really good grasp on whether or not we're going to get sued, essentially. So we're compliant with the ADA, but is it usable and delightful experience, right? So then follow up and say, well, somebody with a screen reader, go through this. Does this make sense to you? So it started out as an idea. And I came to my manager and I said, wouldn't it be great if we had one person who's blind, colorblind, has Down syndrome, test their experience, pressure test them as edge cases, and we would go from there. And they were like, Oxana, it's a good idea. Why don't we do that? Sure. So if you can pull it off, do it by all means. Go ahead. So I came to the accessibility office and they were like, you know what, we've always wanted to do that, but why didn't you make it 6 people of each ability on the panel, and 6 people who are blind, 6 people who are colorblind, 6 people who have Down syndrome? And I said, okay, all right, that's a challenge. I'll take it. All right, challenge accepted. So I essentially did a lot of networking with local organizations like the Chester County Down Syndrome Interest Group, Penn Medicine, a lot of support groups online. And I would say, hey, I'm a researcher with Vanguard. I have a paid position. I value your opinion. You will come in, assess our digital experiences and get paid for it. Do you want to join my panel? So I was able to generate a panel of 30 individuals that way and do research with them. And then it grew to a panel of 60 individuals, which we currently have. So then I acquired budget for myself at work, and now I have a recruiter nobility that does recruiting for me. So I no longer have to be scrappy and sleuth on Facebook for people with disabilities. So somebody is doing the work for me, and they recruit for people with disabilities for me, and we pay them. And everything is done through them, and they handle compensation. So it's a lovely thing to do. So now we have a panel of 60 individuals with disabilities that we do research with. And these are some of the most compelling quotes that I've pulled out of people with disabilities. Let me just move my camera here. It's blocking the quotes. Being blind and an investor means that you have independence. It means like you're like everyone else. It's nobody's business what's in your wallet or bank account. Just because I'm blind doesn't mean that I have to rely on someone to tell me how much money I have. I should be able to know this myself. This is a powerful quote that came from a woman who's blind, and she's owned a couple of businesses. She's sold them, gone out to remote locations just to see if she could live by herself independently in a remote situation. She is an incredible investor. She day trades a lot. She unfortunately does not invest with Vanguard. She invests with Fidelity, but she's very much a client who has a disability, and she has a lot of income that she's generated from her jobs that now she passively she has play money. She plays around with her money. But this quote came from her. She doesn't want to rely on anybody to tell her how much money she has. Having a disability doesn't mean that you're unable to succeed. It means that you have a strength to use other abilities to do so. Our money may not look the same color to me as it does to you, but as far as I know, it still buys the same amount of bread. So this came from a gentleman who's colorblind. So looking into, what money still buys the same amount of bread. So I still should be able to do what I need to do. So then I started generating a lot of questions from my research. People will come to me and say, you know what, Oxana, this research is great and impactful, but how many of our clients have a disability? And I thought, what a great question, because we do have a list of people that reach out to us and self-identify as people with disabilities, but we can't legally ask, do you have a disability? It's personal protected information, and we're not allowed to ask you that. So I thought, I wonder if there's a way for me to figure this little challenge out. And there was. So we have an internal panel of 5,000 clients who have all opted into research with Vanguard. They're all various degrees of investment. Some of them have low income, some of them have very high income, millions and above. And they go to Vanguard and they say, I want to participate in research that you do. And then we're able to tap into them and do research with them. So I went to that group of people, that 5,000 clients, and I crafted a survey that I worked with our legal department with, because I couldn't say, do you have a disability? Yes or no. So I had to ask questions like, do you use assistive technology to access the web? Do you have difficulty understanding words and the meaning behind them after you've read the text? Do you have difficulty understanding the meaning of words? When you read the text, do you have difficulty with the placement of letters, or does the placement make sense to you? Do you care for somebody with a disability? I was able to ask the caretakers to self-identify, but that was the only thing I was able to do. So from that, I was able to parse out their responses, whether or not it was a physical disability, a cognitive disability, or a caretaker. And I thought, I'm going to have like a handful of people say yes to this, but I got over 1,000 clients who said yes and opted into further research. So now we have 1,000 clients who either have a cognitive or physical disability, or care for somebody with a disability. And this is super important because now we have a statistically significant sample of people with disabilities that we can do research with. So now I can do robust quant research and surveys. And most importantly, now when people come to me in my organization and say, hey, Oxana, how many Vanguard clients have a disability? I can say, you know what? About 1/5 of our panel has a disability. So roughly that's a representation of our clients. So roughly 1/5 of our stakeholders might have some kind of disability or care for somebody with a disability. That's a sizable chunk of people. So they're out there and they do have money and they do deserve, we do want to take a stand for every investor and treat them with dignity and respect. So yep, so these are the numbers. So what have we learned so far? There was a study that came to me from a content strategist, and he was really concerned that we're writing ableist language. So he came to me and he said, I want to do a study on whether or not we're writing anything that is ableist. And he said, he's done a lot of reading on ableist language, and he had a lot of questions. There was a lot of information out there about ableist language, but didn't answer a lot of the questions that he had, like click here, hear this message, take this quick questionnaire, things like that. Are those ableist? You know, can you take a look at this thing? Are those things ableist? And he wasn't able to get a response on that through anything that he was doing. So he was like, is that something your panel can help me uncover? And I was like, it's a lovely question. Yes, we can do that. So we did a study with the entire panel, and we found that people with disabilities encounter ableist language on a daily basis. That it was something that they encounter in retail stores, doctors' offices, which is really heartbreaking that, you know, somebody with a disability, they might have to go to the doctor a little bit more often than an able-bodied person. And they encounter ableist language with how their doctor talks to them, or the posters that they see in the waiting room, or the medical language that is used. So that was something that we've uncovered. People with disabilities want to be addressed like everyone else with dignity and respect, essentially. And we were really pleasantly relieved to say that most participants did not find any ableist language on Vanguard.com. We had them assess Vanguard.com for ableist instances. And then we had them rate these phrases: click, like click a button, none of the above, see the page for more detail, hear, visit this page to hear what Tim Buckley thinks about XYZ, speak with an advisor, easy or fast, take a quick questionnaire, it's easy to buy an ETF. And we said, do you consider this to be ableist or not? Is this language ableist to you or not? And what's really important to glean out of this bar graph is that none of those things were 100% ableist. So really, it just depends on the context that you're speaking with. So for example, I have a friend who's blind, and I navigate him. He holds on to my arm when we go outside in public, and he'll hold on to me. And if there's a curve coming up, I'll say something like, hey, Nick, what's your step? And I've asked him, is that ableist? And he's like, no, that's not ableist. But I use the word watch your step, right? Like I know he can't physically look at his surroundings, but it's a meaning, it's an expression of language that we use. So that was the meat and potatoes of the study of what the content strategist wanted to know. Are those phrases ableist? So some people said yes, some people said no, but for the most part, they were safe to use. With caution and in context, and with a lot of supportive text around it. We did a study of deaf investors and how they use chat features. So the chat team came to me and said, I wonder how would somebody who's deaf would interact with their experience. And we found that people who are deaf prefer a chat or text message to communicate with their service provider. Talking on the phone means that they need to have a video service of somebody translating on ASL of what is being said to them, and it's very time consuming. You have to, you're on camera, you have to be dressed, you have to be like paying attention to it all the time. So it's just like there's a lot that goes into it. We found that deaf people don't like going through the IVR. IVR is when you call in and it says, press 1 for option blah, 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 press 2 for option blah, blah, blah. But it's a little bit, sometimes it's too fast. The options, they go too fast for somebody who's calling and they're in a video call and the interpreter is, going. So they get routed to a different place and a wrong place a lot of the time. So they don't like using IVR systems. And a lot of the times, deaf investors feel like chatbots send them in circles. So they're like, I'll just look around for this information myself and find the answer, because this chatbot is just, giving me information that I already know. So we did a lot of recommendations around how to write thoughtful chat responses to people who are deaf. And here's a quote from somebody who's deaf. A hearing person can multitask when they're on the phone, but I cannot. I have to attend to the call constantly. I have to put my life on hold and cater to your business. So I thought that was very powerful. Creating empathetic content. This is how we hired a person with Down syndrome to be our contractor. So I worked on a team that was responsible for a change of ownership. So that's when somebody passes away and leaves an inheritance at Vanguard, and then a surviving beneficiary has to come into Vanguard and receive their inheritance essentially. So it's a very, very sensitive space to be in, because people are very sad. They're in a state of mind of having lost a loved one. They forget a lot of details. They're in a state of mind that is just very, very, there's a lot that goes into, they have to plan the funeral, they have to go through the state, and it's a lot. So we worked with people with Down syndrome to create 2 distinct pages, one for beneficiaries and one for executors, to come in and understand all the steps that were required to receive a inheritance essentially with Vanguard. So we typed up a worksheet of all the steps, and then I tested it with people with Down syndrome, and I said, what did you get out of it? Does it make sense? And they were like, this makes me feel sad. It's talking about somebody who's not here anymore. It's sad, but I feel like I'm talking to a friend. I feel like this friend is holding my hand. I felt cared for. If I have questions, I know I can go to Vanguard and call them at this number and get my questions answered. So we were like, all right, we've hit on all of the things that we wanted to achieve with this. It's empathetic. It's clear if you have a question, what steps to take, how to reach Vanguard. So these were the 2 spaces that we designed, and they've been highly successful and high performing, and they just explain what to do as a beneficiary or an executor. And then finally, changing the password. So the team of changing passwords came to me and said, I wonder how would somebody with a cognitive disability go through a flow of changing a password. And I was like, this is a great idea. So let's test it out. So we found that people with Down syndrome didn't know what the word confirm in confirm password meant. So we changed our language to say enter password again. And that's been changed in the flow of changing your password. So if you ever go to Vanguard.com and you forgot your password, that language has been changed now to enter password again. So our next steps is that we're gathering industry research on how folks with disabilities manage their money and learn about investing. So I essentially do a lot of design thinking exercises like what's on your radar, or cognitive walkthrough, or other Luma exercises with people with disabilities, surveys, interviews, and I'm generating knowledge. And I'm also generating knowledge of how to conduct research with people with disabilities as a researcher. We're partnering with our accessibility office. So we say, okay, we're compliant, but is this usable? Is this a delightful experience for somebody with a disability? And we're performing rigorous research with both our panels. So thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. I'm gonna open up the floor now for questions, and I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Oh, I was on mute. Thank you so much, Oxana. That was amazing. And I loved the specificity of your use cases, but still having a lot of lessons for people that can apply anywhere they are. So we got a lot of great questions too in the chat. So I'm going to let A11y kind of moderate the Q&A if that's all right. And we'll go until about 7:55, unless, you know, we want to keep rolling, but we want to be respectful of people's time and announce the raffle and everything. So let's give it about 10 minutes.
Cool. Thank you so much, Oxana. That was wonderful. I learned so much, and I'm about to learn more when you answer these questions.
Yeah, I'll do my best.
All right, first one is, do you have any recommendations for how to source usability and other research participants with a variety of abilities? I work for a remote first startup with limited budget.
Yes, I used Facebook a lot, and I would go into support groups, and there's a blind and low vision impaired network. There's a lot of local groups to Philly. The only downside of testing with people who are blind is that the experience has to be in production. So you need to have code written. You cannot test a Figma or an Envision link, right? Because it's just an image. So right now there's no technology to test a wireframe. But if it's already been built out and you just want somebody with a screen reader to go through the experience and see if they can accomplish a task, that can be done. And you can bring people on site, or it's tricky to do remotely, but it can be done. You would just have to, they would have to share their screen and share the audio in the screen, and then you would send them the link and they would go through and you would hear the screen reader reading. So that can be done, but Facebook has a lot of groups with people with disabilities, and they're always willing to come in and help out. And I've always gone into the groups and said, hey, I'm learning about XYZ, and I want to test with people with disabilities. Are you willing to do some work with me? And I always get like 5 to 7 people say, I just DM'd you and I want to work with you.
Awesome. All right, next one. What are some best practices or examples for designing experiences that go beyond just meeting requirements?
Best practices that go beyond reading requirements. English language is one that comes to mind. So while people did not find language, like click here and take this quick questionnaire to be ableist, some of them did. And so that's important to note. So try to avoid that language. Try to be mindful of being inclusive of the experiences that you write. Don't use big words. So confirm password, something that we've seen 1,000 times, but somebody with reading at a 6th grader's level might not know what the word confirm means. And those are the first things that come to mind. So I can't think of any more. I'll think on it some more.
Yeah. I actually am just going to add my own follow-on question to that, which is, do you have thoughts on whether it's best to use an icon or a word in some cases? Because, you know, there's something to be said that an icon is like a visual representation and maybe more folks can understand it, but there is sometimes clarity that can be provided with a word or words that does not come from an icon?
Yeah, I think it depends on the icon. So if an icon is like a print icon or a download icon, that's something that's universal and we can use it, and that's fine. But if it's like, I've done some work with icons at Vanguard. So how do you create an icon for hypothetical income, or talking to an advisor, or retirement fund, specifically retirement account, right? Like a $sign with something else in the illustration that represents sunset of retirement or something like that, right? So like, and I did a first click test, and I would say, I would put up images of all the icons that we had, and I said, can you click on the icon that represents retirement? Click on the icon that represents hypothetical income, stuff like that, So, and a lot of people did not get them right. So it just depends on the icon. And then for screen reader, the icon has to be coded with an ARIA label of what it is, so that it announces to the screen reader what it is, unless it's a decorative icon, and then it can just say image of something else.
Cool. All right, that's really interesting. Do you have a must-read book on accessibility that you always recommend, if not a blog, podcast, etc.?
Yeah. So I have a lot of books that I'm looking over to the side to my stack of books that I've referenced a lot. So Accessibility for Everyone, A Web for Everyone, Building for Everyone, Giving Voice. One of my favorites is this one, Demystifying Disability. It's a quick read. It's only about 150 pages. And it talks about, it's by A11y, and it talks about how to talk to people with disabilities, how to approach them, how to think about them when you're catering an event, how to craft an email and things like that, like how to include people with disabilities. So the author has a disability herself and talks about her own experiences. And I found that it's just such an easy, relatable book to read. And it's not like heavy scientific, so just a really good one.
Awesome. I'm going to check that one out for sure. All right, this is kind of a long one. Are accommodations for one group of disabilities sometimes incompatible with the needs of another group? How do you reconcile this? And on the flip side, does inclusive design become more effective as more disabilities are accommodated, or does it become confusing at some point?
Yeah, so that's the question of universal design versus right, so like should we create a separate experience that's accessible, right? So we've struggled with this question at Vanguard. I've done some research in this area. Like, I've asked my panel, do you want to have a toggle on Vanguard.com that says increase contrast and phase out images and just show me the text and do all of that? Or do you want to go to Vanguard.com as is and enter that experience and interact with that? And everybody says, I want to go to like everybody else, to the same one. Just give me the same one and treat me the same so that I can navigate that. So yeah, then it becomes a question of like, how do you build for everybody, right? Like, how do you include like every single disability out there? So somebody who's motor impaired, or somebody who zooms in 500, 600% onto the page, and you have a lot of text, and now they have to read through it. How are they going to interact with it? So like, for example, our page for change of ownership, probably not the most delightful experience for somebody with low vision that needs to zoom into 600% and read it line by line, because it's a lot of text to go through, right? So that's an example of one where we accommodated for people in a situational disability of being in a state of mind that prevents them from thinking clearly, but we didn't think about, well, how does this affect somebody with low vision who has to zoom in 600%. So
Yeah, that's really interesting. That I think was our final question.
There's
Um,
one more question in the chat, if we have time. to
yeah,
answer.
sure. Yeah. How do you and your team prioritize which groups of disabled users to conduct research?
I try to prioritize all of disabilities. So at Vanguard, we tend to think visual first. So a lot of times when I come to teams and I say, hey, I work with accessibility, they're like, oh, great, screen readers. And I'm like, yes, and also deaf people and people with motor disabilities and, you know, all of these other things. So I try to expose, so it depends on the ask of the designer and the question that that they have. So what they're trying to test. So I'll promote different disability to work with. So like, for example, if they're testing content, I'm more likely to say, hey, do you want me to test it with people with disabilities, with Down syndrome for clarity? And a lot of times they'll say, yeah, let's do it. Or we'll test it, or sometimes they'll have a disability in mind that they want to test with. So, but I try to do it across the board, and I try to do as many projects as I can with my entire panel so that we get a holistic overview of how people with all of the disabilities are experiencing our website.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for answering those really good questions. All right, I think I am going to hand it back to Kieran or Epiphany. Are we doing the raffle?
Yeah. Thank you so much, Ellery, for fielding all those questions, and Oxana for answering them very proficiently. So I'm just going to jump very quickly back to our slides. And now I'll pass it to Epiphany to announce our winners of A Web for Everyone, 3 copies of the ebook tonight.
All right, so we have Trine L. I see only one Caroline. There's no last name, but Caroline, and Sophony Syme. Are they still on the call?
Yeah, congratulations. And if you registered, that means we have your email. So if that's not the email you want to receive the ebook, you can reach out to us, PhillyCHI@gmail.com. Otherwise, we will send that your way. Thank you,
All right.
Epiphany.
Congrats to the winners.
Congrats. So thank you again to Oxana. Thank you so much. Thank you to my wonderful board, and thank you all for being here tonight. This was a really informative session. And until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, stay connected. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Oksana.
Bye, thank you.
Forgot to tell Oksana to stay on, but that's okay. I'll email her and follow up. So yeah, I think we can just close this out and we'll follow up on Slack. Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.